Lena had always been aware of her body. From a young age, she noticed the way people's eyes lingered on her curves, the way whispers followed her down the school hallways. It wasn't something she asked for, but it shaped her world. Growing up in a small town where opportunity felt like a distant star, Lena dreamed of more. More freedom, more money, more control over her life. After high school, college wasn't an option. Her family needed her help. Jobs were scarce, and every paycheck barely stretched to cover rent and food. One evening, after a long shift at a diner where customers ogled her but barely tipped, Lena sat in her cramped apartment scrolling through her phone. She stumbled across a website where women advertised services, mostly companionship, sometimes more. The pay was staggering compared to her current wages. Lena thought long and hard. Could she do it? Use her body to make money? The thought stirred a whirlwind of emotions. Fear, shame, curiosity, but also an undeniable pull toward the independence it promised. Her first client was a quiet man in his 50s. They met in a small hotel room downtown. Lena was nervous but professional. She realized quickly that this was not just about sex. It was about connection, control, and boundaries she got to set herself. The money she earned that night was enough to cover a month's rent and some extras. Over time, Lena built a routine. She was careful, selective, and smart. She learned to read people, to protect herself, and to make her own rules. What began as a desperate choice gradually became a form of empowerment. She wasn't just selling her body. She was selling control over her life. Lena took dance classes and yoga, sculpting her body not just for clients but for herself. She found beauty and strength in her own form, reclaiming it from the judgment she'd faced growing up. Her body became a source of pride, a tool she wielded with purpose. Yet, the path wasn't without hardship. There were nights when loneliness crept in, when the world's harsh gaze felt unbearable. She faced stigma, judgment from family and friends who didn't understand. But Lena held on to her vision, a future where she could leave this work behind, build a business, or go back to school. Her story spread quietly among a few trusted friends who saw her resilience and bravery. She became an advocate for women's rights, speaking out about choice, consent, and the complex realities of using one's body for money. One day, after years of hard work and saving, Lena opened a small wellness studio, offering yoga, dance, and empowerment workshops for women. The woman who once used her body to survive had transformed that same body into a beacon of strength and healing. Her journey wasn't perfect or easy, but Lena's story was one of reclaiming identity, agency, and hope. Months passed, and Lena's world began to shift beneath her feet. The money she earned from her work gave her a taste of freedom, but it also came with shadows she hadn't fully anticipated. One evening, after a client left, Lena sat alone in her small apartment, the dim light casting long shadows on the walls. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside. She thought about how her body had become both a source of power and a kind of prison. At times, the work felt transactional, empty, as if she were giving pieces of herself away, piece by piece. The men she met were often polite, sometimes kind, but they rarely saw her as more than an object. Yet, Lena had learned to mask her emotions, to treat every encounter like a business deal. This armor protected her, but it also made her long for something real. One day, while scrolling through social media, Lena stumbled upon a post about a local community college offering scholarships for adult learners. The idea of going back to school ignited something inside her, a spark she thought had dimmed long ago. She signed up for an information session and nervously walked into a classroom filled with people of all ages and backgrounds. The professor, a warm woman with bright eyes, welcomed her and encouraged her to share her story. Lena hesitated but eventually spoke about her past and her dreams. To her surprise, the room filled with nods of understanding and support. For the first time, Lena felt like she belonged in a place where she could redefine herself beyond her body, beyond the money she made from it. Back at her apartment, Lena started to study. She balanced her work with late-night classes and early mornings filled with reading and assignments. The juggling act was exhausting, but every test she passed, every paper she wrote, felt like a step toward reclaiming her future. Still, her work remained a complicated part of her identity. Some nights, the weight of stigma crushed her spirit. She'd hear whispers from neighbors, feel the cold stares when she walked down the street. She wondered if she could ever fully escape the judgment or if it would follow her forever. But Lena also discovered unexpected allies, other women who shared pieces of her journey. At a support group, she met Maya, a former dancer who'd used her body in a different way to earn a living and now helped women transition into new careers. Maya's warmth and wisdom became a lifeline. Together, they planned workshops to help women build skills, boost confidence, and find alternative paths. Lena's wellness studio idea grew from a dream into a blueprint. She envisioned a space not just for physical fitness but for healing and empowerment, where women could reconnect with their bodies on their own terms. One night, after a particularly challenging day juggling a tough client and a difficult exam, Lena sat in her studio's empty room. The hardwood floors gleamed under the soft light. She touched her reflection in the large mirror, seeing not just the woman her clients saw but someone who had survived, fought, and dreamed. Her body had been her tool, her weapon, her shield. Now it was her canvas. Lena's story wasn't about shame or regret. It was about transformation. Every scar, every curve, every choice was part of her history. And her power. The road ahead was still uncertain. The stigma, the financial struggles, the emotional battles, they weren't gone. But Lena had learned something invaluable. She was more than her past, more than the money she made, more than anyone's judgment. She was a woman who used her body to survive, and who was now building a life where her body was her temple. The first rays of dawn filtered through the tall windows of the small studio space Lena had rented in a quiet part of town. The smell of fresh paint mixed with faint traces of sawdust and new wood. It wasn't much. Bare walls, creaky floors, but it was hers. 4 months, Lena had saved every dollar she earned, balancing work, school, and the countless hours spent searching for the right location. Today was the day she would open the doors of Embody, her wellness studio dedicated to movement, healing, and empowerment for women. The sign she designed hung proudly above the entrance, a simple outline of a woman in motion, graceful and strong. Inside, mirrors lined one wall, reflecting the sunlight and the space she dreamed would transform lives. Mats were stacked neatly, plants dotted corners, and the air hummed with possibility. Lena stood at the threshold, heart pounding, nerves buzzing like electricity. What if no one came? What if the community rejected her because of her past? What if she wasn't ready? But then she thought about the women she had met, women who had suffered, survived, and sought healing. Women like Maya, who had become her mentor and friend. Women who needed a place where their bodies were not commodities but sources of power. The first client arrived. A young woman named Sarah, timid and unsure, who had battled her own demons of self-worth. Sarah smiled shyly, and Lena felt a warmth blossom in her chest. The studio gradually filled with women from all walks of life. Survivors, seekers, dancers, athletes, and those who simply wanted to feel at home in their own skin. Lena led yoga classes, dance therapy sessions, and workshops on self-acceptance and body positivity. Each session was a revelation, a small victory over the shame and scars so many carried. Lena watched as women who once hid beneath layers of doubt began to stand tall, move freely, and speak their truths. Yet, the journey wasn't without setbacks. One afternoon, a local newspaper ran a piece that hinted, subtly but unmistakably, at Lena's past. The article questioned whether someone with her background was fit to run a wellness business. The backlash was swift and painful. Emails flooded her inbox, some supportive, many harsh. Social media comments ranged from encouragement to cruel judgments. Lena felt the sting of public scrutiny, the old shame clawing its way back. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was she really ready to face the world openly? Was she strong enough to fight the stereotypes? But then, at her next class, the room filled with the faces of women who believed in her. Sarah stood up and spoke softly. "You saved me from giving up on myself." Maya hugged her tightly, whispering, "This is your moment. Your story is strength." The community rallied, turning the negative spotlight into a movement. People came forward to share their own stories of resilience, inspired by Lena's courage. Lena realized that by owning her past, she could rewrite the narrative, not just for herself but for every woman who had been judged or overlooked. Embody became more than a studio. It was a sanctuary, a beacon of hope. And Lena, she became a symbol of transformation. Her body, once a means of survival, was now a source of light. The scars and stories etched into her skin were badges of honor, proof that she had built her life with courage, grit, and grace.